We'll call to order the Subcommittee on Communications and Technology, and I recognize myself for an opening statement. Today, the Subcommittee will consider a slate of bills to improve transparency and consumer access to the decision-making processes at the Federal Communications Commission. I'm pleased that both Republicans and Democrats alike recognize the value of increased transparency at the Commission and see a need for congressional action to improve the FCC's decision-making process. We all realize the incredible reach that technology has in our lives. We live in the world where we carry smartphones in our pockets, watch connected televisions at home, and conduct business by video conference in the office. Smallest entrepreneurs carry portable credit card scanners, and the largest corporations build server farms. They store our emails, map our vacations, secure our transactions. The FCC's work doesn't only impact the industries that it regulates, but also as daily consumers of communication services, our own lives as well. This is why it's so important to make sure the FCC functions in an effective and transparent manner. We have seen enough to know the FCC falls short of the standard for a well-run agency. It's 2015, and the 2010 and 2014 quadrennial reviews are still not finished. Meanwhile, daily newspapers close up shop in city after city. And D.C. insiders continue to get preferred access to information, while the general public awaits in the dark until rules are already adopted and the Commission decides to publish them. Even FCC commissioners, we heard in testimony, find themselves in the dark when it comes to the work of the Commission itself. It doesn't seem right, and we'd like to fix it. I'd like to thank my colleagues for offering targeted, common-sense solutions. The FCC's current process denies the public any visibility into the rules the Commission plans to adopt from the time the FCC informs the public it is thinking about rules until they're already voted into law. Representative Kinzinger's bill would require the FCC to show the public what it expects to vote on by publishing drafts circulated for vote or for an open meeting. Similarly, once the rules are voted into law, there is no requirement that the FCC tell the world what it has adopted. Representative Elmer's draft bill would require the FCC to show the public what it just voted on by publishing the text of the rules within 24 hours after the vote. Not all FCC actions require a commission vote. Some are adopted by the staff without the input of commissioners. It's called delegated authority. Representative Latta's draft would require the FCC to list the items to be adopted on delegated authority 48 hours before they're effective to show the public that no one is hiding the ball under delegated authority. When the Commission does vote on new rules, the process by which this happens is largely done behind closed doors. Representative Loebsack's draft would allow the public to understand the up-to-now secret processes of the 8th floor of the FCC. This is the kind of transparency that even the staff at the FCC will appreciate. No one likes to work where the rules are unclear and subject to change or whim. Representative Matsui's draft bill would require the FCC to actively find a way to increase the ability of the public, small businesses, specifically to participate in the agency's rulemakings and proceedings, and Representative Clark's bill would ensure that the public knows how much progress the FCC has made on the public's request for action. It'll be harder for the agency to bury delays and hope they go unnoticed. So as we go forward, we hope to reconcile these very good draft bills with a more extensive process reform bill that both the ranking member and I supported last Congress. This bill would put more structure around rulemakings and rein in the delays, good government policies that the bill requires the FCC to structure for itself. With that, I yield to the gentlelady from California for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to all of the members that are here today. I offer my support for 4 of the 7 bills that are being considered today, and I think that this demonstrates that when Democrats see an opportunity to enhance FCC transparency through statutory changes, we will work with the majority to do so. So let's start with the good news. The FCC Process Reform Act has come a long way since first being introduced in 2012. The discussion draft I circulated with Chairman Walden and Representative Kinzinger represents a compromise that will give the FCC flexibility to evaluate and adopt procedural changes to its rules without putting rigid requirements in statute. During last week's legislative hearing, the consensus of all of our witnesses was that it makes sense to simultaneously implement the FCC Collaboration Act with the other reforms included in the underlying bill. As a result of the experts' feedback, I'm going to offer an amendment today to ensure that this much-needed reform is implemented without delay. There's no reason to have a delay. I don't understand what this one-year delay is about. There's just consensus across the board. Everyone that comes here has said so. So I'm going to ask colleagues to support this simple but important change to the FCC Process Reform Act. I want to commend the chairman for including 3 bills offered on April 30th by our colleagues, Representatives Clark, Loebsack, and Matsui. Collectively, these 3 bills will help to keep the FCC fast, efficient, and transparent. While each of these reforms could be implemented independent of a statutory change, enactment ensures that the agency will carry out these reforms under future FCC chairs. Notice I'm not saying chairmen, I'm saying chairs. So we're going to leave that one open, and hopefully we'll have a woman that chairs the FCC. I don't think we ever have in the history of
yes, we did. Ms. Clyburn was acting chair.
She was acting chair, which was wonderful, but we want even more. At least I do. Finally, there are 3 bills offered by Representatives Latta, Kinzinger, and Elmers, which I must oppose. Simply put, enhanced transparency should not come at the expense of regulatory certainty or potential legal challenges on every commission action. And that's really what it would bring about. If you want to just throw more sand in the gears to stop the gears, that's what will happen. As a coalition of 14 public interest organizations succinctly stated in an April 30th letter to the subcommittee, quote, "We support the goal of maximizing transparency and openness at the FCC, but not at the expense of the Commission's ability to function effectively and efficiently in the public interest. And for these reasons, we encourage members of the committee to set these bills aside and work toward reforms that form a better balance between the FCC's role as an expert agency and the flexibility needed by commissioners to reach maximum consensus in their decisions." So where we have bipartisan support, I work with you, Mr. Chairman, to bring those bills to the floor and ultimately reach the President's desk, and I yield back. I know I'm out of time. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes Chairman of the full committee, Mr. Upton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last Congress, this chamber passed a bill unanimously to institute real reform at the FCC, and our votes were in favor of good process and meaningful transparency at an agency that indeed touches our daily lives. I'm pleased to see that this subcommittee working on a bill again in this Congress. Due process and transparency are too important to simply give up on, and I applaud the subcommittee's commitment to making meaningful improvements. My colleagues from both sides of the aisle also have offered sensible reforms that will improve the function of the FCC in a significant way. Transparency and process are the foundation of public trust in the government and are critical to the legitimacy of the law. It's true regardless of party affiliation. Our committee operates openly. Debate, amendments, and votes all occur under the watchful eye of the public. The FCC's decision-making process should be held to a similar standard of transparency. I support these bills, urge my colleagues to support them as well, and yield back.
Gentleman yields back balance of time. Chair recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Although Chairman Wheeler has committed to us and his fellow commissioners that he would continue the comprehensive review of the internal processes of the FCC, I'm not opposed to the subcommittee exercising its oversight role and to provide guidance to the agency where necessary. But any congressional action must allow the FCC to remain as nimble as the industry it regulates, and legislative efforts should not cause unnecessary litigation leading to regulatory uncertainty. It's for these reasons that I can't support the 3 bills offered by Representatives Elmers, Kinzinger, and Latta. We have consistently raised concerns about these proposals since they were first released last month. These bills are a step backward from where the Congress ended last year with the FCC Process Reform Act, and the 3 proposals would tie the hands of the FCC, slow its work, and lead to years of legal fights, in my opinion. But although we disagree with the Republicans' approach, we are, of course, always on the side of transparency, whether at the FCC or elsewhere, and that's why Democrats put forth our proposed alternative to ensure that the FCC remains fast, efficient, and transparent. The public deserves to know the rules of the road by which the FCC operates, how fast it makes its decisions, and how it can improve participation by small business. But our proposals let the FCC retain flexibility to keep up with the market. I appreciate that the chairman is considering most of the Democratic bills today, but I will note the absence of one component of the Democratic transparency package, and that's Representative Yarmouth's bill that would require the FCC to modify its rules to require disclosure of donors to entities that purchase issue advertisements. As I said before, transparency should not stop at the doors of the FCC, and so I support Mr. Yarmouth's amendment today. That would add his bill to this discussion. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Chair reminds members that pursuant to the committee rules, all members' opening statements will be made part of the record. Are there further opening statements? Chair recognizes gentlelady from Tennessee, Ms. Blackburn, for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the work that this committee and the staff has done to advance these process reforms at the FCC. Those of us that have innovative, technology-driven communities in our neighborhoods are looking forward to seeing these process reforms take place. We hear a lot about the process at the FCC being broken and needing to be fixed. These are bipartisan solutions that will advance important reforms and move us toward a more transparent framework at the FCC. We would hope the FCC will not only welcome these ideas that improve the functioning of the Commission, but will be proactive in presenting proposals that also help achieve this goal. It is the beginning of a comprehensive process. It's going to take some time. We're going to be committed to it, and it is truly in the best interest of all stakeholders. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady from Tennessee. Recognize the gentleman from Kentucky for 1 minute.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, I'm very supportive of making the FCC more transparent. I believe we should increase transparency of the organizations filling the nation's airways with anonymous ads. That's why 2 weeks ago, I introduced the Keeping Our Campaigns Honest Act. This bill requires the FCC to revise their sponsorship identification rules to require organizations purchasing political and issue ads to disclose the names of their donors. Until we tackle the looming issue of anonymous money and the flood of special interest spending that paralyzes our democracy, we'll never truly be able to responsibly address the major issues that hardworking American families face. I'm disappointed that my bill is not among those up for debate today, but I hope the members of this committee will support my efforts today to amend the FCC Process Reform Act of 2015 to include language from the Keeping Our Campaigns Honest Act. I look forward to the upcoming debate on my amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Chair recognizes the Vice Chair of the Subcommittee, Mr. Latta, for 1 minute.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for holding this hearing today. And over the past several weeks, this subcommittee has been very diligent in examining ways to improve FCC process reform. The discussion drafts before us today all seek to better advance transparency, efficiency, and accountability at the agency. I'm proud to be sponsored for one of these drafts that require the FCC to identify and describe all items to be adopted by the Commission staff on delegated authority prior to action being taken. This is necessary to avoid abuse of delegated authority and decrease public awareness of the agency's day-to-day decisions. I think we can all agree that it is important the FCC is held accountable to the American people. With that, I urge as we work forward today, the passage of these common sense proposals, and I would thank the chairman once again and yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of time. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from New York. Or the gentleman from Iowa. Whoever wants to go first on. Okay.
Ladies first.
You want to wait till we call up your bills?
Yeah, please, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else on the Democratic side seeking recognition for an opening statement? 1 minute. If not, we'll turn to Mr. Barton for 1 minute, if he so desires, or I can go to Mr. Kinzinger if you want a minute to settle in.
I want to. I know you can't reserve opening statements. When Chairman Upton gets in, I want to point of personal privilege, but I'm going to waive my opening statement.
All right, gentleman waives. We'll turn to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Kinzinger, for an opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding the markup to discuss codifying into law a number of reforms to the manner in which the FCC operates, both through the FCC process reform legislation put forward by the chairman and the standalone transparency legislation that I'm offering today. This has obviously been something that this committee has been discussing for quite some time, and I'm happy to see that we have bipartisan support to move forward in a manner which will provide proper oversight of the FCC by this committee. I also want to reiterate that I do appreciate the efforts of Chairman Wheeler that he's taken at the FCC to seriously investigate reforms which could and should take place at the Commission, but it's very important to understand that it's the responsibility of Congress to delegate to the Commission what it may or may not do, and any lasting reforms that are to be implemented should be done through the actions of this committee. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Are there any members on either side seeking recognition for an opening statement? If not, then we will move on, and the chair calls up the committee print to the Ms. Matsui's bill, a bill to direct the Federal Communications Commission to submit to Congress a report on improving the participation of small businesses in the proceedings of the Commission. The chair calls up the committee print and asks the clerk to report.
Discussion draft. To direct the Federal Communications Commission to submit to Congress a report on improving the participation of small businesses in the proceedings of the Commission.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill will be open for amendment at any point. So ordered. Are there any bipartisan amendments to the bill? Are there any amendments? If not, I recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Matsui, for discussion. For what purpose does she seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that transparency and efficiency at the FCC is a good thing, and I think we all agree on that. And my legislation as being considered today would make it easier for my small businesses in Sacramento and across this country to engage with FCC on policies that may impact them. You know, the FCC oversees industries that account for 1/6 of the economy, which includes countless small businesses in every community in this country. And whether it's a small business or a startup, small businesses cannot spend scarce resources on lawyers or lobbyists to have an impact. And in most cases, their companies will be affected by the FCC, as their decisions will be just as impactful as those of other large corporations. So this is an avenue to make it possible for the small businesses to have their voices heard at the FCC, and it allows the legislation, FCC, to coordinate with the Small Business Administration. I do hope people on the committee will be able to support this bill. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes himself to commend the gentlelady for her legislative endeavor here. I'm supportive of it, and I think our side is as well. We appreciate you doing this good work, and we're glad to have it before the committee. Are there other members seeking to strike the last word on either side? If not, then the question now occurs on forwarding the committee print to the full committee. All those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it, and the bill is favorably reported. Now we pull up Mr. Loebsack's bill, a bill to amend the Communications Act of 1934 to provide for publication of the Internet website of the Federal Communications Commission of certain policies and procedures established by the Chairman of the Commission. Chair calls up the committee print and asks the clerk to report.
Discussion draft. To amend the Communications Act of 1934 to provide for publication on the Internet website of the Federal Communications Commission of certain policies and procedures established by the Chairman of the Commission.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with. The bill will be open for amendment at any time. So ordered. Are there any bipartisan amendments to this bill? Seeing none. Are there any other amendments to this bill? Seeing none. With that, for what purpose the gentleman from Iowa seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to speak for 5 minutes on my
Strike
bill.
the last word. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank you and the ranking member for their support for this bill and for your efforts to incorporate greater transparency into the FCC operations. I joined the committee, this committee only this Congress, but I know that the issue of FCC reform is something the committee has been examining for several Congresses. Unfortunately, often it's been also a very partisan issue, even though it need not be. I think we can all agree that the FCC and all our federal agencies need to be transparent and responsive to the American people. And I think that's something that we've already heard today and we're going to continue to hear today. And that's why I'm offering this bill to shine some light on the way that the FCC makes decisions. My bill would require the FCC chairman to post online the guidelines and procedures the commissioners use when considering items. Public participation, as we all know at the FCC, has never been higher. The millions of Americans reaching out to the FCC deserve to know how the FCC makes their decisions. Small businesses and consumers should have as much visibility into the operations of the FCC as the big corporate interests and their high-priced telecommunications lawyers. My bill is short and to the point. It would simply require the FCC to post the policies and procedures of the Commission on its website and post any changes within 48 hours. Mr. Chair, thank you again for consideration of this bill, and I very much appreciate the bipartisan support that the bill has received. It's good to know that we can work together on these issues, and I do ask for the full support from my colleagues in favor of this bill, and I yield the remainder of my time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
More than welcome. We too believe this is good legislative concept and happy to bring it forward. Are there other members seeking to strike the last word on this draft? Seeing none, the question now occurs on forwarding the committee print to the full committee. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it, and the draft is favorably forwarded. Now we'll go to the clerk draft. Chair calls up the committee print and asks the clerk to report.
Discussion draft to amend the Communications Act of 1934 to provide for a quarterly report on pending requests for action by the Federal Communications Commission and pending congressional investigations of the Commission.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with. The bill will be open for amendment at any point. So ordered. Are there any bipartisan amendments to the bill? Are there any other amendments to the bill? I believe the chair recognizes the gentleman from New York. Mr. Collins has an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do offer an amendment today to make a small change to a bill that I think everyone agrees would improve transparency and accountability at the FCC. This subcommittee...
if the gentleman will suspend, the clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to discussion draft offered by Mr. Collins.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the gentleman is now recognized for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
So picking up where I left off, to the end that we are dedicated to ensuring that the FCC is transparent, this subcommittee has asked for regular updates from the Commission on items pending before the agency, a reduction in the backlog of work before the agency, and the introduction of other metrics. The draft offered by Ms. Clark would make this information available to the public without the need for Congress to ask each time we want an update. However, we do have some concern with the provisions that require the disclosure of the costs of complying with congressional oversight requests. We don't object to the disclosure of this information, but we are concerned about its accuracy. We have long asked the Commission to do a better job of tracking its time and expenses, particularly with respect to its auction budget. In the absence of a system to verify the Commission's actual time and expenditures, this metric would amount to little more than a guess. That is why this amendment would require an audit of the Commission's figure. As this report will undoubtedly be used in the future to request additional funding from Congress, we want to know the information is verifiably accurate. I thank the gentlelady from New York for her bill and her efforts to improve the Commission's transparency. And I urge my colleagues to support this amendment and the underlying bill. And with that, I yield back.
Would the gentleman yield?
Certainly. Yeah.
You raise an interesting point. Does that mean that there needs to be an appropriation attached to this so that audits are done?
Within the FCC budget, as I would understand it, yeah, they have a lot of discretion on their budget, and they'll need to do these audits and live within their budget.
I just want to raise it because I don't know myself, honestly, in the realm of things, what these audits will cost. So I don't know who can answer that. Maybe you're raising the issue, maybe the staff can tell us.
I believe, if the gentleman would yield.
Yes.
I believe that the cost of these comes out of the GAO's budget, not the FCC budget, just as a part of, and I think the council may be able to respond to this as well. Grace, you want to? I don't think that's turned on.
Thank you. I believe this would have to come out of the GAO budget. We are. That would be something that the CBO would have to score.
So we have to have a score on this?
At some point.
We'll have it at some point. Would you prefer we not move forward on Ms. Clark's bill till we get answers to that?
No, I just
we can
think
work
that
on it between here and full.
I think that we need to, members will need to know. Yeah. Because you're.
All right. Does the gentleman yield back?
I do, but just as a point of clarification, just like we do in the private sector, whenever we prepare numbers that have a consequence, like an annual report, we have them audited. We don't guess. Basically, the IRS doesn't like guesses. We have audits for a reason, and if we are going to be asking for these cost estimates, the last thing we can do is rely on somebody's guess and use that guess as though it's gospel, absent some kind of audit. So an audit is a standard practice in the business world for verifying that numbers that are used are in fact accurate, and that's all this amendment does. I yield back.
For what purpose, the gentleman from Pennsylvania?
Move to strike the last word.
He is so recognized.
Yeah, I mean, just like you're asking the commission to provide a cost estimate, that's what we're trying to figure out. We'd like you to provide a cost estimate of, and also I'm just curious why every 6 months seems a bit excessive to me. Is there some formula or magic behind the fact that we do it every 6 months?
Gentleman from New York, do you want to yield to the gentleman?
Yeah, I'll yield to the chairman.
My understanding is that this is not too far out of the normal protocols on how we work with GAO. I think in most committees we ask GAO to do audits and do investigations and don't usually get bogged down in this. But we're happy to either delay the bill or work it out between here and full. My understanding is it would come out of the existing GAO budget, and just a way to make sure the numbers are double-checked.
I'll yield back. Yeah, so at some point we'll get a score, right, Mr. Chairman?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Does the gentleman yield back? Yes. Gentleman yields back. Are there other members seeking time? If not, the question comes on adopting the amendment to the draft. All those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The draft is amended. The question now, or any further discussion on the amended draft? Seeing none. The question now arises on approval to the full committee.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes. For what purpose, gentlelady from New York?
I'd like to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes on her bill.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank Ranking Member Eshoo for, first of all, convening this markup. I'd also like to extend a thank you to Representative Collins, my fellow New Yorker, for his thoughtful amendment to my draft bill. I do not oppose the amendment, and I appreciate the efforts to improve the bill. The FCC oversees dynamic sectors that make up 1/6 of our national economy. Consequently, it is important for the government to understand and act quickly to keep up with the rapid innovation and shifts affecting these industries. Whether it's an application for a license or a request for new rules, the public deserves timely responses from the FCC. There are some issues and tasks at the agency that have simply taken more priority over others, years to complete, and we must avoid these time hogs that prohibit other business from getting done. Essentially, we need the FCC to effectively multitask while maintaining clear transparency around timelines to keep up with its broad portfolio of work. The agency's delay, for example, on the rulemaking or petition can have a negative impact on the commenter whose next steps or survival is intricately tied to the agency's decision. It's been 10 years, 7 pleading cycles, and the FCC has not yet acted on including multilingual emergency alerts in life-saving situations. There must be a stringent standard that agency leadership follow and be held accountable. I know the Commission is working hard to speed its decision-making, but the best way to ensure that future administrations live up to this standard is to hold them accountable in the public they serve. How else can we measure if the agency is effectively managing new and pending requests? How else will the public know the status of their concerns and if the concerns are completely off the table? My draft bill would make data about the speed of business before the FCC available to the public. It would also include information about the impact of congressional investigations on the agency's ability to handle its workload. I look forward to working with my colleagues and the FCC on these and other matters. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentlelady for her legislation and her acceptance of the amendment, and she yields back the balance of her time. Are there others seeking recognition on the Clark draft as amended? Seeing none, then the question now occurs on forwarding the committee print as amended to the full committee. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it, and the bill is favorably reported.
Mr. Chairman, now that...
Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from, for what purpose does gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Speak out of order, a point of personal privilege.
Gentleman's recognized.
We have with us, Mr. Chairman, the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Upton, and as we all know, the congressional baseball game is going to happen in 3 weeks. Mr. Doyle is working extremely hard to continue his unfortunate success rate. But I have from the archives a photo that I want to show the committee, and hopefully if we can get a close-up on this. This is our chairman a few years ago, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to pass it around and then show it to the...
Was he a ball boy then? What?
But the gentleman next to him is Mr. Carl Purcell from Michigan. So I'm going to...
Hey, I had the record for most stolen bases in a game.
That's true.
Substitution, 7.
And I also have, this is one that we could do a trivia question on.
No, it's not.
Who is the young man with the 3 children? And this is our staff director of the full committee, Mr. Gary Andres, and I'm assuming that's your 3 children. Many, many years ago. So we'll pass these around, Mr. Chairman, but I thought y'all might get a kick out of seeing that since the congressional baseball game's coming up in a few weeks.
I'm thinking the chairman stole so many bases because they just thought he was the bat boy out there. Took no notice.
He was fast.
Yeah.
He was fast. Of course, he wore the Cubs uniform, which slowed him down a little.
It's going to happen this year. I just want to warn you.
Yeah, this is the year. The gentleman yield back. Gentleman yields back. We'll get back to our markup now. The chair calls up the committee print LATA and asks the clerk to report.
Discussion draft. To amend the Communications Act of 1934 to require identification and description on the website of the Federal Communications Commission of items to be decided on authority delegated by the Commission.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with. The bill will be open for amendment at any point, so ordered. Are there any bipartisan amendments to the LATA bill? Are there other amendments or any amendments to the LATA bill? Seeing none. For what purpose, gentlemen from Ohio seek recognition?
I thank the chairman and strike the last word.
So recognized. 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for bringing up the bill. This is a really, as we've been talking about today, a very simple bill on transparency. I think it's very, very important. You know, when I go across my district and I hear from my folks back home, the #1 issue they always talk to me about is federal regulations. And so when we're talking about regulations, it's good to have something that's transparent like this piece of legislation when folks out there know exactly what's happening in an agency. And as I've noticed through a good number of years, my constituents have really wanted more access to what we're doing not only here in Congress but across the federal government. And so what this does, of course, is that not later than 48 hours before a time and order decision or report or action is made under delegated authority. It's got to be identified, put on the website, and I think it's very, very important. It's a good piece of good open government that people back home can identify what's happening and have a description, and it doesn't have to be long, but something out there so they know what's happening. And there are a couple of exceptions to the in the legislation that from an administrative law judge or a threat to health or safety that constitutes an emergency that wouldn't have to be done. But I believe, Mr. Chairman, that's very, very important that as we're working on transparency, especially in this information age, that we have that instant access for our constituents, people back home, to have that information. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back balance to his time. Are there anyone else seeking recognition? Seeing none? Oh, all right. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from California.
You have a customer
For what
here.
purpose does the gentlelady seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word,
And
Mr.
recognize
Chairman.
for 5 minutes.
I appreciate it. Mr. Latta is a gentleman and a respected member of the committee, and I always appreciate his work, but I don't support his bill, this particular one. This sounds like it's non-menacing, you know, list the decisions, 48 hours, et cetera, et cetera. And it deals with delegated authority. Now, the FCC chairman testified when he was here last that the commission releases hundreds of thousands of such items each year. The vast, overwhelming majority are routine and non-controversial. I really think that this throws sand in the gears instead of greasing the gears to make the agency more efficient, more effective, and really to keep things on fast track. I know that there's a resistance to the whole issue of when it's stated that a bureaucracy is making the decision, the public doesn't know, oh my God, the sky is caving in. So hundreds of thousands, they release hundreds of thousands of such items each year. They're non-controversial. Now, do you want to take this and move them into another column? You want to take 22,000 and have them discussed and debated? I think the bill really keeps the FCC. I think it has the opposite effect of what we're all trying to achieve with FCC reform. The bill adds a 48-hour delay that makes businesses wait longer for an FCC decision, and it does nothing to enhance transparency. Effectively, I think telling the FCC to wait and take more time to release decisions that have already been made. So I don't really see the merits of this one. And I know that the gentleman does. I respect him for it. But when you peel back that first layer of the onion and understand how this actually works, I mean, the commission, I want to say this again because it's a lot. The commission releases hundreds of thousands of such items each year. So I think in my book, that's a lot. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on this, but I don't really see, I don't think the advertised merits meet what we're trying to accomplish here on a bipartisan basis. So regrettably, I oppose it, but I just don't think it lives up to its advertisement, and I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes himself. Strike the last word. This one is truly remarkable that my colleague would oppose. For this reason, first of all these decisions made by the FCC are made public. They already have to do that. They make the decision. They make it public. All Mr. Latta is attempting to do here is say, before you do that, you've already compiled the decisions. You're going to make them available to the public 48 hours before you actually act. It's not going to change their workflow. It may change their timing, but you know what? Access to the public's business is good public policy. Making this information available to those who may be affected is a good thing, not a bad thing. It's sunshine. You know, I'm not part of our side here has a difference, and the difference is we're for openness, transparency in the people's business. We are for doing the public's business in front of the public, not in secret behind closed doors, smoke-filled rooms, delegated authority. In 2014, Chairman Wheeler instructed the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau to adopt a report on competition in the wireless industry on delegated authority. However, this report is required by statute, by law, to be adopted by the Commission, not by the staff. In this case, not only was the action taken in secret, it was done in contravention of Congress's express dictate that the full Commission debate and vote on the report. This is why we need to change the law. This is why we need to enforce the law. This is why we need to stand up for more openness in government. This is why they should put these issues out for public review 48 hours in advance. Now, I don't know where my colleague got her numbers in terms of adopted items, but the response from the FCC is not hundreds of thousands, it's 1,845 delegated authority items in 2014. That is...
Mr. Chairman, would you yield? It's 950,000.
Well, then the FCC is not providing us with accurate information because we asked them the number of delegated authority items an FCC adopted between 2004 and 2014. I'm reading from their document.
The chairman testified to that.
I'm reading from the document, then we have a problem with the chairman.
Well, then we need to get a hold of him. I'm using the numbers from his testimony.
This is actually from his response to our QFRs, signed by the chairman. So then he's either not being truthful to us in this document or when he testified, which raises a whole nother issue. But this is in response to delegated authorities. In 2014, it was 1845. This is signed by Chairman Wheeler, unless somebody's stolen his stationery and impersonated his signature. I recognize the gentleman from Ohio.
Well, I thank the chairman for yielding, and just to reiterate, I think it's important to point out, as the chairman did, that all these are going to be published anyway. The public is going to find out. This is giving the ability for people to know before the action is taken, not afterwards. And I think, again, for that transparency, for that information to be out there, that incident access for people to know what's going on before the committee, I think it's important that that occurs. And again, the bill will capture those and allow the public to see everything that's going on under the delegated authority before it becomes law, not after. So I appreciate the chairman for yielding and yield back to him.
Are there other members seeking recognition? The gentleman from Vermont is recognized for 5 minutes. Or for what purpose, gentlemen, seek recognition? Strike the last word, is recognized.
Strike the last word, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. You know, there's a balance here between wanting to have an open process and making decisions and moving ahead. When I was in the Vermont legislature, I found that frequently when I was on the losing side, I had good arguments to make a more elaborate and complicated process, which was really about trying to slow down the implementation of a decision. And some of my colleagues who disagreed with me oftentimes did the same thing. And it feels a little bit like this is not exactly what it seems. The decisions that are going to be made are made after there's been public input, correct? So,
delegated authority?
Right.
Not necessarily.
There is going to be there is public input when there's going to be information that's provided, and then when the decision is made, there's legal recourse for folks who may dispute that decision. And the question I have is whether or not we're creating excessive process that gets in the way of making timely decisions. You know, we're all for openness and transparency, and the fact that you have, do we want to have people in the room as people who have to make a decision are deliberating, so that in real time they can hear the arguments back and forth? That's not a practical. The
gentleman yield.
I'll yield, sure.
Isn't that exactly what we're doing right here, right now, having people in the room, the press in the room?
Sure, but when you're
all we're saying is publish 48 hours. It doesn't change their legal recourse or activities. It just says to the public, here's what we're going to be voting on 48 or delegating or deciding 48 hours from now. That's all we're saying.
Right. So what you're doing is kind of creating in this 48-hour window a scramble where there's going to be a relitigation of the fight that went on for the months or even years ahead. So that's what I see as an impediment to the effectiveness, the effective administration of a governmental agency, and that's whether it's under Republican leadership administration or under a Democratic leadership administration. So in fact, I think from my perspective, if one of our objectives is openness, and I take you at your word on that, Mr. Chairman, another one of our objectives has to be an efficient process. And there's a question of when you're adding layers of process that add mountains of expense and don't really facilitate a more elaborate discussion of what the issues are, it just delays making a decision and moving on.
Gentleman yield back. Gentleman yields back. Are there other members seeking recognition? If not, the question now occurs on forwarding the committee print. We didn't amend this one, correct? To the full committee. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it. Roll call is requested. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Lotta. Mr. Lotta votes aye. Mr. Barton. Mr. Barton votes aye. Mr. Shimkus. Mr. Blackburn. Ms. Blackburn votes aye. Mr. Scalise. Mr. Lance. Mr. Lance votes aye. Mr. Guthrie. Mr. Guthrie votes aye. Mr. Olson. Mr. Olson votes aye. Mr. Pompeo. Mr. Pompeo votes aye. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Kinzinger votes aye. Mr. Bilirakis. Mr. Bilirakis votes aye. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Long. Mr. Long votes aye. Ms. Elmers. Mrs. Elmers votes aye. Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins votes aye. Mr. Kramer. Chairman Upton. Chairman Upton votes aye. Ms. Eshoo. Ms. Eshoo votes no. Mr. Doyle. Mr. Doyle votes no. Mr. Welch. Mr. Welch votes no. Mr. Yarmouth. Mr. Yarmouth votes no. Ms. Clark. Ms. Clark votes no. Mr. Loebsack. Mr. Loebsack votes no. Mr. Rush. Ms. DeGette. Ms. DeGette votes no. Mr. Butterfield. Mr. Butterfield votes no. Ms. Matsui. Ms. Matsui votes no. Mr. McNerney. Mr. McNerney votes no. Mr. Lujan. Mr. Lujan votes no. Mr. Pallone. Mr. Pallone votes no. Chairman Walden.
Aye.
Chairman Walden votes aye.
Are there other members who, Mr. Shimkus?
Mr. Shimkus votes aye.
Mr. Kramer?
Mr. Kramer votes aye.
Are there other members wishing to record their vote? If not, the clerk will report the tally.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, there were 16 ayes and 12 nays.
The ayes have succeeded. The bill is the draft is forwarded to the full committee favorably. Okay, the chair now calls up committee print Elmers and asks the clerk to report.
Discussion draft to amend the Communications Act of 1934 to require the Federal Communications Commission to publish on its internet website changes to the rules of the commission not later than 24 hours after adoption.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with. The bill will be open for amendment at any point. So ordered. Are there any bipartisan amendments to this bill? Are there amendments to this bill? Seeing none, for what purpose gentlelady from North Carolina seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the reason we put forward this discussion draft is, again...
Gentlelady's recognized. Strike the last word for 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. We feel very strongly, as do all of our members of this subcommittee, that we need more transparency at the FCC. I think this Discussion draft is very straightforward. It basically says that after a decision is made, that within 24 hours, that needs to be put on the internet for our constituents to be able to read, and our constituents can understand what is actually being put forward. I think this is common sense. I think that this is nothing that we would ask any one of our members to do or lack of here in the committee as well when it comes to making sure that we're informing our constituents of the work we're doing. I think the FCC needs to be held to that same standard. Once the decision is made, I don't see why there would be an issue that you wouldn't be able to get that information out onto the internet within 24 hours. We live in an amazing time with technology advancements. I don't see why this would be an issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Generally yields back balance of her time. Are there others seeking recognition? Seeing none, the question now occurs on forwarding the committee print to the full committee. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. A roll call vote is requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Latta. Mr. Latta votes aye. Mr. Barton. Mr. Barton votes aye. Mr. Shimkus. Mrs. Blackburn. Mrs. Blackburn votes aye. Mr. Scalise. Mr. Lance. Mr. Lance votes aye. Mr. Guthrie. Mr. Guthrie votes aye. Mr. Olson. Mr. Olson votes aye. Mr. Pompeo. Mr. Pompeo votes aye. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Bilirakis. Mr. Bilirakis votes aye. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson votes aye. Mr. Long. Mr. Long votes aye. Mrs. Elmers. Mrs. Elmers votes aye. Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins votes aye. Mr. Kramer. Mr. Kramer votes aye. Chairman Upton. Chairman Upton votes aye. Miss Eshoo. Miss Eshoo votes no. Mr. Doyle. Mr. Doyle votes no. Mr. Welch. Mr. Welch votes no. Mr. Yarmouth. Mr. Yarmouth votes no. Miss Clark. Miss Clark votes no. Mr. Loebsack. Mr. Loebsack votes no. Mr. Rush. Mr. Rush votes no. Ms. DeGette. Ms. DeGette votes no. Mr. Butterfield. Mr. Butterfield votes no. Ms. Matsui. Ms. Matsui votes no. Mr. McNerney. Mr. McNerney votes no. Mr. Lujan. Mr. Lujan votes no. Mr. Pallone. Mr. Pallone votes no. Chairman Walden.
Walden votes aye.
Chairman Walden votes aye.
Are there other members who wish to record their vote? Mr. Kinzinger.
Mr. Kinzinger votes aye.
Mr. Shimkus.
Mr. Shimkus votes aye.
The clerk will report the vote.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote there were 17 ayes and 13 nays.
The ayes have prevailed, and the committee draft, or the draft bill, is now reported favorably to the full committee. The chair calls up the committee print Kinzinger and asks the clerk to report.
Discussion draft to amend the Communications Act of 1934 to require the Federal Communications Commission to publish on the website of the Commission documents to be voted on by the Commission.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with. The bill will be open for amendment at any point. So ordered. Are there any bipartisan amendments to the bill? Seeing none, are there any amendments to the bill? Chair recognizes himself. I have an amendment at the desk.
Amendment to the discussion draft offered by Mr. Walden of Oregon.
Thank you. Chair recognizes himself to speak on the amendment for 5 minutes. I'm offering a manager's amendment to the draft bill in response to some of the concerns that were raised in the course of discussion with outside parties over the last few weeks. Unlike the processes at the Commission, where a consideration of new rules occur behind closed doors, this draft bill had a hearing a few weeks ago. The actual text, remarkably, the text itself we're considering was made available to the public. The result was good feedback from concerned parties, and the changes to reflect that feedback are contained in this amendment. First, we heard from commenters that they were concerned that the release of the FCC chairman's discussion draft to the public would necessitate another round of comment at the Commission. Commenters warned that this would result in an endless round of comments. That was not our intent, terminally delaying the FCC action. Nobody wants this. which is why we reached out to administrative law experts and critics of the bill to figure out a way to accommodate these concerns, despite the fact that administrative law experts informed us that the concerns were misplaced, that the language as is would not trigger a new round of comments. This amendment offers a belt and suspenders approach. Unlike a notice of proposed rulemaking, order, or other document that represents final commission action, a release from the chairman of his or her proposed discussion draft no more necessitates a new round of comments than a speech or a social media post. FCC chairmen routinely express their opinions on matters before the commission in speeches without any additional comment cycle. Release of the chairman's thoughts in the form of a discussion draft for commission consideration is no different. We also heard from commenters that the language that permits, quote, good faith, close quote, changes to the item during the circulation period could be construed as limiting commission negotiation in the lead up to an open meeting. As we sit and openly discuss changes to bills in a form streamed on the internet for the world to see, as we're doing today, I just want to put to a fine point on this. Critics of this bill think that we might inadvertently hinder the FCC's secret negotiations on text no one outside the commission is allowed to see until it is law. But in an effort to address these concerns, this amendment removes this quote-unquote good faith requirement. The reforms in this bill are not necessarily new ideas. They aren't even necessarily Republican-only ideas. In fact, in 2009, frustrated by FCC process failings, Gigi Sohn, then the head of the public interest group Public Knowledge, and now herself a senior advisor to the FCC chairman, Tom Wheeler, said that there is general agreement that, quote, a healthy FCC must give the public more information about what decisions it is making, how it is making them, and why. And it must allow for the public to have more meaningful input into the policy-making process, close quote. So it's curious to me now how it was a good idea then, but now that we are offering such a change, the idea of an accountable and transparent FCC is somehow partisan retribution. Accountability and transparency should permeate good process. The irony of this legislation is that it is a modest step forward toward real transparency. It's a modest step. As we sit here today and have a robust and open debate on documents available to the public before a vote, I am struck by the numerous calls from the minority for quote-unquote regular order, which is Capitol Hill speak for transparent and predictable process, just as we, the expert agency on legislation and policy, conduct ourselves in the open. We believe that the FCC will be benefited, the public benefited, by doing so as well. With that, I would recognize if anybody else on my side seeks time. Mr. Kinzinger, I yield to you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I agree with your amendment, and I think it's a good addition to the bill. And I just want to say, I mean, again, this legislation, the underlying legislation, it's just going to simply require that the FCC publish a draft of their rulemaking once it's circulated among the commissioners commissioners for a vote. There's other independent agencies that have been able to take very similar actions in order to increase transparency in their process. And I believe this committee has the authority and responsibility to move the FCC towards a more open process that only benefit the general public. It's important to reiterate here that this will not prevent the commissioners from making changes to rules once they're circulated. It'll just simply give public access to the actions being taken by the federal government. So I hope that my colleagues will cross the aisle and on my side of the aisle will work with me to move this legislation forward. Again, I agree with your amendment, and I yield back to you your time.
And I yield back the balance of my time. Recognize my friend from California, Ms. Heshu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your amendment, but it still doesn't address my concerns with the underlying bill. Now, what you just described with great passion about the FCC's process is actually how the Supreme Court operates. The Chief Justice puts out a discussion draft, and there's the opportunity for both minority and majority opinions to be discussed. I think that what is embedded in Mr. Kinzinger's the underlying legislation ends up working against the minority on the commission. Now, this is something, first the chairman comes up with the draft document. This is 3 weeks before an open meeting. And I think that this proposal really echoes a letter that was sent to Chairman Wheeler in January of 2015, and I think really underlies this whole thing. Let's put it right out on the table. I mean, the whole thing was really about net neutrality. And the chairman was, well, I don't think it's funny. I mean, we don't have to agree with each other, but you're not a source of laughter to me. I take you seriously. I just may not agree with you sometimes.
Will the gentlelady
but,
yield?
Let me just finish my thought, and then I will. But in that letter, the chairman was asked to release his draft network neutrality order before the other commissioners had an opportunity to review it. And regardless of the subject matter, if you examine what the process, and we're talking about process reform, where does this bring about a healthy reform? I really fail to see that. I think that posting these draft arguments could spark, I still believe, could spark an unending cycle of lobbying on successive draft items. And specifically, any new items or new arguments raised in the record in response to the draft text could force the agency to trigger a new round of notice and comment. This is going to be like a merry-go-round, going round and round and round.
Will the gentlelady yield?
So, let me just finish my thought, and then what's left I'll be happy to yield. I think that it could really undermine the ability of FCC commissioners who are in the minority on any given agenda item vote to negotiate changes in a draft once it's been made public. So I don't think this is a healthy reform. I really don't. So in fact, I think of the three bills that I'm opposed to, and I believe my colleagues are on my side, I think this is the worst one because of what it would bring about. So I'd be happy to yield.
Well, I appreciate the gentlelady's comments. Let me just say that Gigi Sohn first raised this issue about transparency back in 2009. Mr. Kinzinger, and we began this discussion, I think, or at least we began this discussion in 2011. So I was chuckling at the notion that somehow a letter we sent on net neutrality in 2015 was the purpose of this bill, because it is laughable to me that everything where we disagree suddenly has a tie to the talking point that it's about net neutrality. It is not. And the fact that it may...
Well, if I may reclaim my time,
absolutely.
Mr. Chairman, you haven't heard me say that about any of the other offerings. I believe that this particular one is very much tied to it. You don't have to agree with me. That's my opinion.
But if you're going, if the gentlelady yield?
But it just for the record, I'm saying that I have not raised this with the others. I think that this one was and is tied to that. You can disagree with me. It's okay. It's my opinion. But I don't think overall that this is a healthy reform amendment, because I think it's going to trigger a mess. It's going to trigger a mess. And if we're interested in efficiency, in speed, in transparency, that I don't believe that's what this will achieve. And I'm sorry, I'm out of time.
Chairman recognized himself to strike the last word. First of all, on the notion of the circuitous comment appeal, the amendment we just offered takes care of that matter. So that talking point is outdated in the notion. We heard that, we recognized that, we heard it from the witnesses, and we dealt with it in the amendment so that won't occur. Again, I get back to this is about making text available of a draft so that the public can help the commission do their business better, just as the public helps us do our business better. And the notion somehow that the FCC is equal to the United States Supreme Court, I find remarkable. It is not. And I would just say the FCC is a delegated authority of the Congress with a public interest obligation to do the public's better business in public. And the notion, as we heard from commissioners and others, that the text can be basically kept secret. The public doesn't really know the specifics. It's like saying we're going to pass a bill on something around here, and after we're done, we may tell you what it is, but we're not even going to tell you when we're going to tell you. We'll print it in the Federal Register someday later on. We're saying make the draft text available. You'll get better comments from people. You'll have a more informed decision-making process. And by the way, once all this process begins, right now the other commissioners can't even disclose what the draft text is to people who come in to lobby them. So everybody operates in the dark. If you want to defend that process, have at it. We just have to agree to disagree. I think a more transparent public process is better for governance, and I'd yield to the gentleman from Illinois.
Well, I thank the gentleman and the chairman. Again, I appreciate the debate over this. I just want to confirm, Mr. Chairman, what you said earlier, which is we had these discussions long before any of this action on net neutrality. I've been in Congress now. This is my third term. I think, in essence, right when I came in, we started talking about this issue, and long before we talked about the process of net neutrality. To be honest with you, I've been very shocked that this has been a point of debate. I thought this was going to be one of the bills that, we agree on, vote, no discussion, because it's pretty obvious. So, look, I understand the position sometimes of the minority. In many cases, you don't want to agree to everything. Maybe you have legitimate concerns with this. But again, with the Supreme Court interprets the Constitution, which is very different than making new regulations, which is done by the FCC. So, again, I just want to confirm that this has been something we've been talking about since the entire time I've been in Congress. And with that, I'll yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
And I will yield back the balance of my time. Is there anyone else seeking recognition? If not, the question comes before us is all those in favor of the amendment will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. No. On the amendment. Okay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Now, are there any other amendments to the bill? If not, the question now occurs. Oh, I'm sorry. For what purpose the gentleman from New Mexico seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Chair recognizes the gentleman for his amendment.
The amendment is office. Oh, I apologize. Thank you, man. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. I'm just getting a little ahead of myself, sir. A little eager.
It's all right.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
That's what happens on that row. We'll get eager. No, that's a good thing. It's a good thing. I was on that row one time. With that, any other amendments or comments? If not, then the question now occurs on forwarding the committee print as amendment to the full committee. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it, and the bill is favorably forwarded to the committee. The chair now calls up the committee print on the FCC Process Reform Act of 2015 and asks the clerk to report.
Discussion draft to amend the Communications Act of 1934 to provide for greater transparency and efficiency in the procedures followed by the Federal Communications Commission and for other purposes.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with. The bill will be open for amendment at any point. So ordered. Are there any bipartisan amendments to the bill? Are there other amendments to the bill? Chair recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Eshoo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This was bipartisan at one time, and I do have an amendment at the desk. It is 01, I believe.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to the discussion draft offered by Ms. Eshoo.
Without objection, no, we did that. Yeah, the gentlelady's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We all know that the FCC Collaboration Act enjoys strong bipartisan, bicameral support and would enhance collaboration and streamline decision-making at the FCC. Commissioner Pai and the members certainly heard him describe the bill by stating that it would, quote, help us meet deadlines set by Congress and the shot clocks we set for ourselves, unquote. Former Commissioner Abernathy stated that the current prohibition on more than 2 commissioners meeting, quote, actually discourages creative problem solving, inhibits a collaborative spirit, and creates hurdles to a timely and effective decision-making process, unquote. So given such strong statements from individuals who understand the problem, actually have lived it because they are prohibited from talking to each other, they've experienced the challenges firsthand. My question is, why would we delay implementation? My amendment would remove the 1-year delay of this provision and ensure that it can be implemented at the same time as the other proposed reforms. For all of these reasons I've stated, I urge my colleagues to support this simple amendment. Now, we keep talking about transparency, efficiency, effectiveness over and over and over and over and over again. I'm all for over and over and over and over again. But this flies in the face of what we're doing or trying to achieve, what you're trying to achieve as chairman of the subcommittee, by delaying this. I don't think anyone's placed on the table why a delay is terrific. It's a great idea. So that's why I'm offering the amendment. It's been bipartisan. It's been bicameral. Our witnesses have said to a person that it should be implemented along with the underlying legislation. Former FCC commissioners have said so. Present FCC commissioners have said so. From both sides of the aisle have said so. And you've got a delay in this. So I wouldn't be offering it unless you had the 1-year delay in the underlying bill. I would be happy to yield to anyone if they'd like to lean in. If not, I'll yield back my time. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back balance for time. Chair recognizes himself. Strike the last word. I'm a little perplexed about the amendment because last Congress, when we all sat down and agreed to this, this was a negotiated bill. And in good faith, we agreed to put in the collaboration piece with a 1-year delay so that the other parts of the bill could be implemented by the FCC, and then they would get this new authority. In exchange for that, we agreed to take out the cost-benefit analysis. That was the agreement you and I had. That was the agreement our staffs had. That was the understanding we all had until Monday, this week, when we were informed you were going to offer this amendment, which is contrary to the prior agreements and understandings and commitments that we had last session on this bill and going into reintroduction and movement of this bill. So I'm caught a little surprised at the change.
Would you yield, Mr. Chairman?
I'd be happy to yield.
I raised the same objection last year, Mr. Chairman. This isn't anything new. And to say that we swapped and that I agreed to the delay, I objected to the delay in the last go around as well. So
well, reclaiming my time, that's not my recollection or the staff's that negotiated this. The exchange was the collaboration, the Sunshine Act, and a 1-year delay on that, and we would take out the cost benefit. Well, I'm sure you didn't like it, but you agreed to the. So you don't recall the agreement we had that said we'll put this in and take out cost benefit. If you'd like, we could put cost benefit back in and start where we were, or we could go back to the original bill.
Would you yield?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I don't think from the dais is the time to negotiate these things. I'm offering this straight away, the way I did last time. I never negotiated this away. I objected to it last time, and most frankly, this is a small thing. And if you want to fight over this and you want to delay it, then you know what? Some of the things you like and some you don't. It's okay. But let's not have pose for holy cards here. Let's not pose for holy cards, because transparency is in Mr. Yarmouth's bill, but you don't like it.
I'm going to reclaim my time.
Yeah.
I'm reclaiming my time.
You can reclaim it.
Would the gentleman yield?
I would yield to the gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you. And I'm sorry this has become contentious. I feel torn between two lovers. Ann is a good friend, and this was a bill that we offered, on transparency. We thought it was good. I was trusting the chairman and ranking member to move the process forward, and I'm just caught in a catch-22 here, and I feel bad about that. And I hope you all can go back and work out and get your agreement, and we can bring it forward. But as you all know, and as our side knows, I'll be supporting my chairman if we have to have the vote process. But I wish I wouldn't be in this position.
Would you be willing?
Well,
to
the time is the chairman's.
I'm going to reclaim my time, because obviously there's a breakdown here. This is the bill we reintroduced. It's the same bill we passed in the House. It was carefully negotiated among our staffs last cycle, and part of that negotiation, as I understand it, was collaboration goes in, 1-year delay, so that the FCC can do the rest of it, and we would take cost benefit out, which we did. I'm standing by that. That was the commitment I made. I keep my word. I'm going to stand by that. I know you keep your word. If you want to change the bill now, I guess I understand that, then I guess that opens it up, and we'll look at other amendments.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I supported the bill last year so that it would move, but I also objected that there was a 1-year delay. So I don't,
But did you reclaim my time?
Yes.
You didn't offer an amendment last year, did you?
I objected. No, I just objected, but I voted for the bill so that it would move forward.
Right.
So I think that my
And then we
intentions
voted on it
were
on the floor, and we negotiated and agreed to this. I could easily have said I objected that the cost benefit wasn't in there. But
Well,
we agreed, and that's
obviously
part of. I'll reclaim.
We have different takes on it. I think
I
think the Collaboration Act can stand on its own. It's not
I know
a big
that.
deal, and everyone
I'm aware
is
of that.
for it.
I reclaim my time, but this is part of a package of trying to get reform at the FCC. With that, my time has expired, and I would oppose the amendment. Are there others seeking recognition? Recognized gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Lujan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that very much. I have an amendment at the desk.
If the gentleman would suspend, no, now we're 0 for 2 here.
I was just trying
to. We have not voted on.
I was
the
just trying to do my due diligence, there, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back balance of his time. I know he's happens on that row. Let's go to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Rush.
I'm going to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized.
If the ranking member would like to use part of my time, then I would yield to the ranking member if she wants to use part of my time.
Well, I appreciate the gentleman from Illinois. I'll just say this very quickly. This is, of all the things that are being offered for reform, this one has been around the longest. It has the most bipartisan support. It has bicameral support. It has former commissioner report. It has present commissioners' support, both Republicans and Democrats. And I don't know why we need to delay it any longer. So, I rest my case. This is not, I'm not angry with the chairman. I want this thing to move. He doesn't want it. He wants it to delay it. That's the way it is. But I think it's important to place on the table, and I appreciate you giving me the time to restate it. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Other members seeking recognition? If not, I guess the question comes before us. If there's no further discussion and the vote occurs on the amendment, all those in favor shall signify by saying aye. Those opposed, nay. The nays appear to have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Now, the chair would recognize the gentleman from New Mexico, I believe, who may have an amendment.
Appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. I hope that there'll be a lot of applauding for some time, Mr. Chairman. With that being said, I do have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to the discussion draft offered by Mr. Lujan.
Without objection, the reading of the amendments dispensed with, and the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his amendment.
Thank you, Chairman Walden and Ranking Member Eshoo, for the time today. Access to broadband is a critical and necessary resource for all Americans to find jobs, do business, engage healthcare professionals, communicate with family and friends, learn, and find out what is happening in the world on issues that impact them directly. Unfortunately, when it comes to broadband access, tribal communities have been disproportionately left behind. According to the Federal Communications Commission's most recent broadband progress report, nearly 2/3 of residents on tribal lands lack access to high-speed broadband. This is simply unacceptable. This amendment I'm offering today would make permanent the Office of Native Affairs and Policy at the Federal Communications Commission, founded in 2010. ONAP, which works to ensure that tribes have a seat at the table at the FCC. Making this office permanent would send a powerful message that we are committed to addressing the digital divide that plagues so many tribal communities, but we must also ensure that this office has the resources and support it needs to complete its mission. Today I received a letter of support for this effort from the National Congress of American Indians, NCAI, and the United South and Eastern Tribes, USET. And Mr. Chairman, I ask that I can submit these letters into the record.
Without objection, you may, of course.
And Mr. Chairman, as we've been having conversations with the majority, in the spirit of bipartisanship, I'm going to withdraw my amendment this afternoon, but I hope that we can find a way to work with our colleagues, and we've been reaching out to many, to find a way to get this addressed in the near future. The New Mexico delegation, amongst leaders of the Energy and Commerce Committee, has also communicated with the FCC leadership with our concerns that meaningful consultation that should be taking place has not been. Initial conversations left tribal leaders not included in the conversation, where that appears to have changed a bit now. But that's no excuse for not including this meaningful partnership. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I hope that we'll be able to work so that also in tribal communities across America that don't have access to broadband, we'll be able to support entrepreneurs and innovators who want to build a brighter future for their people, help prepare to succeed in today's competitive economy, and ensure that seniors receive the care that they deserve. And so with that, Mr. Chairman,
would the gentleman
I would yield. Thank you.
I appreciate the gentleman raising these issues, and I share the gentleman's concern about the lack of access to high-speed data on Indian reservations and out in Indian country. And I look forward to a partnership here to make sure that that we continue in our rural areas, in our native areas, that they continue to have access and better access and improved consultation. Whether it's, I pledge to work with you on that. It's important.
Chairman Walden, I appreciate that so very much, and I thank the committee for its time. With that, I'll withdraw the amendment. Thank you.
Gentleman withdraws his amendment without objection. Are there other amendments? The gentleman from Kentucky. For what purpose do you seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to the discussion draft offered by Mr. Yarmouth, Mr. Pallone, Ms. Eshoo, Mr. Butterfield, Mr. Welch, and Ms. Matsui.
Without objection, the reading of the amendments dispensed with, and the gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes on his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first, I'd like to thank Ms. Eshoo, Mr. Pallone, Mr. Butterfield, Mr. Welch, and Ms. Matsui for co-sponsoring this amendment. In today's political reality of nonstop campaigning, our system continues to fail the American people, allowing special interests and shadow groups to flood our airwaves with anonymous ads with no disclosure whatsoever. My amendment simply directs the FCC to use its existing authority to require disclosure of the actual people behind these ads. We've all seen them. We have an ad for health care, taking a position on health care reform or the environment or oil drilling, and the disclaimer says, citizens for cuddly kittens. And you don't know whether that's actually veterinarians or oil magnates or trial lawyers. It can be any of those. The American people is not served by that system. It's clear that the definition of social welfare organization under the tax code is being exploited by interests across the political spectrum. And until the IRS issues more effective standards prohibiting 501c4 organizations from engaging in political activity, we should err on the side of more disclosure, not less. That's why I believe the FCC must update its sponsorship rules to reflect current times and technological capabilities. In the McCutcheon decision, Chief Justice Roberts wrote, quote, because massive quantities of information can be accessed at the click of a mouse, disclosure is effective to a degree not possible at the time Buckley or even McConnell was decided, unquote. Buckley v. Vallejo was decided in 1976, and McConnell v. the FEC was decided in 2003. It has been decades since the FCC has revisited its sponsorship rules in a meaningful way, and action is long overdue. This is not a new idea nor a partisan idea. As I mentioned in a previous discussion, Senator McConnell, throughout 30 years, has talked about the need for thorough disclosure of the people running political ads. Many individuals and groups have called on the FCC to act in this area. In their 2012 book, It's Even Worse Than It Looks, Thomas Mann and Norm Ornstein wrote, quote, requiring stations to disclose in real time the identities of all significant donors who paid for political ads and to acquire the information from the ad buyers is clearly within the agency's purview and would create the appropriate disclosure that the court has applauded and the FEC has blocked, unquote. There are many government agencies that can act to improve transparency in the political system. As I stated earlier, the IRS should clarify its rules on 501c4 organizations' engagement in political activity. The SEC should begin rulemaking on public disclosure of corporate political spending to shareholders. The Federal Election Commission needs to be reformed so that it is a functional agency that can respond in real time. And the FCC can ensure a level of honesty in campaign ads. Without these changes, our citizens cannot expect a democracy that works for them or a Congress that puts their priorities before the demands of special interests. It's time for the FCC to act. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Kansas. Strike the last word.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do strike the last word. And while I appreciate Mr. Yarmouth's interest in the integrity of our political campaigns, I think everyone here does that. This amendment is misguided and misplaced. At least I believe it is. Our staff has reached out repeatedly to try and figure out exactly what the objective here was over the past several weeks, and they have not had much success in getting their counterparts to respond to them. And I think it's fair to say that it makes it difficult to know if this is just a talking point or a political messaging effort, or if there's an earnest effort to actually reform the campaign finance laws. I fear it's the former. If it's a legitimate effort, then this is not the place for that. This is a discussion about FCC process reforms. As Mr. Yarmouth said in his comments, there's lots of other actors. There's the Internal Revenue Service, there's the FEC, but certainly when we're having a debate on FCC process reform, attempting here to regulate one actor, a single actor in the process, that's right, such as the broadcasters and the cable programmers, leaves open to lots of challenges, lots of difficulties, and suggests that this is not a serious effort at ensuring that our political campaigns are straight up and legitimate. It's in fact a thinly veiled effort to overturn significant First Amendment freedoms as the Supreme Court identified in Citizens United, and should be rejected for that reason. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to strike the last word. I want to thank Mr. Yarmouth for offering this. It is germane. Otherwise, something would have been raised with the parliamentarians. So to my friend from Kansas, it is germane to FCC reform. And I would suggest that of everything that we have taken up and debated, agreed, disagreed on today, that this is singularly the most important one. Why? Because it goes to the heart of democracy. Now, the word transparency has been used, and I welcome the word, over and over and over again. This is about transparency for the voters of our country and the agency that actually has the jurisdiction to update the jurisdiction that it has so that we don't have some phony baloney fakers who put up God knows how much money to persuade your constituents and mine, but we don't know who they are and what they've put up for it. Now, if this went on in another country, I think we'd be taking to the floor of the House. We'd have heated debates, and I don't know how many committees in the Congress, justifiably so, saying that thank God we don't do that in our country. But we do, and we allow it. I have spoken about transparency in the law in California. And is it ever powerful? Is it ever powerful? And it's all because it's transparent. There's a political ad on the public airwaves. Note that word, public airwaves. And at the end of the ad, where you see a child skipping through a meadow, and it may be about oil drilling, you can't tell by the content of the ad, but at the end of the ad, there's a requirement by California law that there has to be transparency and disclosure, exactly who sponsored the ad. Now, no one has reached out to me, by the way, to find out more about this. And I just leaned over and asked Mr. Yarmouth. I don't know who the gentleman might have called or tried to speak to, but it was neither the maker of the offering the legislation or myself as the ranking member. Maybe there was someone else that was contacted, but it's the first time I've heard. I would have loved to have sat down with the gentleman to have a chat about this, and I'd be willing to in the future as well. But I think that that this is an existential threat to our democracy. This is not about the money. The money is totally out of control thanks to the Supreme Court, and that both McCutcheon and Citizens United. I think Citizens United is one of, if not one of the worst decisions that any Supreme Court in the history of our country has handed down. This is about what the chairman has been talking about, what everyone has been talking about, is transparency. And you know what I find this is a happy coincidence. And I haven't seen it since I've been in Congress, in the committee that I serve on. We have both the chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee on this committee, as well as the chairman of the Republican Congressional Campaign Committee. Both of these chairmen are on this committee. Wouldn't it be a glorious day in the Congress if both of them supported transparency for the voters of our country, that there be disclosure and transparency in political advertisements? The FCC today has the authority to do. So I think we're pushing on the FCC in all of these areas. They don't like a lot of these reforms that your side and my side, our side, are advancing. But I'm not here to just simply please an agency. I'm here representing people, and so are you. And that's why the debate on this legislation and the content of it is really so extraordinarily important. So with that, I yield back the very little balance of my time. Thank
Gentlelady
you.
yields back the balance of her time. Are there other members seeking recognition? Gentleman from New Mexico.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And I join my colleague, Mr. Yarmouth, in supporting this amendment. Mr. Chairman, as we talked about the conversation that was taking place earlier today, I want to reference some of the remarks that were made about transparency, towards real transparency, increased transparency, inform the general public, give the public access, no more secrets, full disclosure, a more informed public. This process operates in the dark. As we look at some of the inherent authorities that are included with the FCC, but also contained within the FCC Process Reform Act, I think that there's a broad scope that encompasses many aspects of the FCC that are in front of us. And so, Mr. Chairman, if there's a way that we might be able to work together on this, I think that this is a great way as we talk about shining a bright light, making sure that there's not going to be any more operation in the dark. Full disclosure, no more secrets. something that we can all celebrate and get behind. And I think there's a path forward for us to do that today. So I'm hoping, Mr. Chairman, that this may pass on a voice vote, and that we might be able to just get this done and get this included. And if not, that maybe we find a way to just get this done. So as we talk about being genuinely concerned with transparency, I would hope that all of my colleagues would join myself and Mr. Yarmouth, Ms. Eshoo, and others who are co-sponsors of this amendment with Mr. Butterfield, Mr. Welch, and Ms. Matsui in supporting this amendment, because the American people have a right to know, and that's what this is all about. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I strongly encourage my colleagues to support this amendment.
Will the gentleman yield?
I would yield.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your yielding. I just wanted to clarify something. Mr. Pompeo asked a question of what my motivation was in offering this amendment, and I'd just like to get on the record that I've already introduced in the last Congress and in this Congress constitutional amendments to overturn Citizens United. I was the primary sponsor of the Fair Elections Now Act in the last Congress. I was a co-sponsor and supported the Disclose Act when it moved through the House several years ago. And when I came to Congress, I said one of the three things I wanted to accomplish was to get the money out of politics. So I think my track record is very clear that I have a very sincere interest in eliminating or reducing the influence of money on our elections. And if we can't do that, the least we can do is let the American people know who's trying to influence them, and that's the import of this amendment. I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I yield back.
And Mr. Chairman, before I would yield to Mr. McNerney, I would just note that in the previous debate that we were just having, there was conversations of amendments that would require the FCC to publish on its website 48 hours before making a decision on a delegated authority. There was debate on requiring the FCC to publish on its website changes to the FCC regulations within 24 hours of adoption. So it looks like there's room on the FCC's website for posting of information to inform the general public. So maybe we could use that as a place to do this, or even debate that required the FCC to publish on its website draft documents 3 weeks before. So whether it's 24 hours before or 48 hours or 3 weeks, there may be a path to do this. And so with that, I would yield to Mr. McNerney.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. I just wanted to say a word or two about Citizens United. The Supreme Court sent a ruling down that money was the same as speech, and I strongly disagree with that, but I understand that there's a legitimate disagreement, and I'm willing to debate that. But what I don't understand and don't agree with is that disclosure is any way, shape, or form a threat to free speech. Disclosure is a part of free speech. If you want to say something, you should stick your head out there and say it, and let people know who you are and what your motives are. And then to hide behind big money is not anything like free speech. And so that was my point of disagreement. And I yield back to the gentleman from New Mexico.
Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back balance my time, sir.
Gentleman yields back. Are there other members seeking recognition? If not, if there's no further discussion, the vote occurs on the amendment. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Nay. The nays appear to have it, and I feared there'd be a roll call vote. We'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Mr. Lotta. Mr. Lotta votes no. Mr. Barton. Mr. Shimkus. Mrs. Blackburn. Mrs. Blackburn votes no. Mr. Scalise. Mr. Lance. Mr. Lance votes no. Mr. Guthrie. Mr. Guthrie votes no. Mr. Olson. Mr. Olson votes no. Mr. Pompeo. Mr. Pompeo votes no. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Kinzinger votes no. Mr. Bilirakis. Mr. Bilirakis votes no. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson votes no. Mr. Long. Mr. Long votes no. Mrs. Elmers. Mrs. Elmers votes no. Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins votes no. Mr. Kramer. Mr. Kramer votes no. Chairman Upton. Chairman Upton votes no. Ms. Eshoo. Ms. Eshoo votes aye. Mr. Doyle. Mr. Doyle votes aye. Mr. Welch. Mr. Welch votes aye. Mr. Yarmouth. Mr. Yarmouth votes aye. Ms. Clark. Ms. Clark votes aye. Mr. Loebsack. Mr. Loebsack votes aye. Mr. Rush. Mr. Rush votes aye. Ms. DeGette. Ms. DeGette votes aye. Mr. Butterfield. Mr. Butterfield votes aye. Ms. Matsui. Ms. Matsui votes aye. Mr. McNerney. Mr. McNerney votes aye. Mr. Luan. Mr. Luan votes aye. Mr. Pallone. Mr. Pallone votes aye. Chairman Walden.
Walden votes no. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas. How are you recorded?
Mr.
No.
Barton votes no.
Mr. Shimkus.
Mr. Shimkus votes no.
Are there other members wishing to record their vote? If not, the clerk will report the tally. Oh, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, there were 13 ayes and 17 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Are there further amendments? If not, the question now occurs on forwarding the committee print to the full committee. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it, and the bill is favorably forwarded. Without objection, the staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes to the legislation approved by the subcommittee today. So ordered. Without objection, subcommittee is adjourned.